Welcome to the Ernie Chambers Show.
Brothers, sisters, friends, enemies, and neutrals. I explained why I give that introduction. But here's something that we should all keep in mind. A person who may seem to be a good friend today may be the one who will stab you in the back tomorrow or tonight. Somebody you thought was an implacable foe or enemy may be the one who will rescue you when everybody else was turning their back on you. So we should realize that in the same way that sands on the desert shift when the wind blows, people change. The characteristic that applies to everybody, saint, sinner, fool, wise person, is change. What we are this evening, believe it or not, is often different from what we were this morning. I'm not going to get all deep and philosophical, but there seems to be that concept of a cyclical movement in history, that history repeats itself, and it reminds me of a rhyme I wrote a long time ago. The little boy was in school, and they were having a history lesson, and he was not paying attention, so the test was given. And again, he was just kind of doodling and tapping his pencil, and finally the teacher took him aside. She said, "Johnny," every little boy in a joke is named Johnny. "Johnny, we're going in the cloakroom. We have to talk about this." When we were having recitations today, you were not prepared when we came to history. I thought maybe you would take from that the awareness that you needed to study. So now comes the time to take the history, and you're not doing anything. You're not writing anything. "Why is that, Johnny?" He said, "Well, teacher, I heard everybody say that history repeats itself, so I thought I'd just let history tell its own story, because history would get it right." All that comedians do is take something that is very ordinary and dress it up in different clothing. And people know that issue that is the subject of the joke, but they never would have made the joke because they think in a straight line. Comedians go in, out, roundabout, up, down, and hit you when you're not expecting it. I don't mean like Will Smith hit that guy. I'm not even going to call his name because it was so embarrassing and he probably wants to get over it. But that guy shouldn't have laughed or made a joke about Will Smith's wife's lack of hair, which was due to alopecia. Things may be cyclical or go in a cycle when it comes to history. What happened 10 years ago may have happened 50 years prior to that. What I'm going to do is touch on what is happening to the Palestinians. I identify with them. The Palestinians had a country called Palestine, and European Jews running from the Nazis and discrimination in Europe came to Palestine, and to make a long story short, began to drive the Palestinians into less and less land until they took it over. There's a racist poem that's given about the Japanese, and you can apply it to what the Israelis did and are doing to a murderous degree to the Palestinians. How courteous the Japanese. He always says, "Excuse it, please," steps into his neighbor's garden, smiles and say, "I beg your pardon." Then he grins his friendly grin and invites his hungry family in. And then he gives his friendly bow, "So sorry, this my garden now." Naturally, white people fabricated that story. But sometimes when you give it in a proper context, it's not degrading or demeaning, but it makes a point about how some people view others unlike themselves. European Jews faced horrific circumstances during the Nazi regime. They were gassed, subjected to experimentation, burned, their bodies, and sometimes people were yet alive. They were made to kneel beside trenches, which turned out to be mass graves. Rather than learn from that and understand what it means to be oppressed, they flocked to Palestine. Didn't realize they were in somebody else's home, somebody who didn't stand at the border with machine guns saying, step across that line and you're dead meat. And now they are doing the Palestinians worse in some respects than the Nazis did the Jews. As I go through this, I want something to be kept in mind. The only ones who can be blamed for a wrongful act are the ones who did it. The worst thing in the world is to take the conduct of people who are a member of a group and judge the entire group by that small sampling that you have. I hate what the Jews are doing to Palestinians who are the ones doing it. Maybe they'd rather be called Israelites, Israelis, but they are marked by their conduct, and in this case, misconduct. They are brutal, they are vicious, they are cruel. And I'm talking about the ones who are doing these things. I don't care what a Jew in America may feel in terms of sympathizing with Netanyahu, who, by the way, has criminal charges pending over himself. There were demonstrations by hundreds of people, in some cases maybe thousands, because he wanted to undermine the courts and become an absolute dictator in the way that Trump hopes to do. And by the way, Trump is now selling Bibles. I'm not joking. He's selling Trump Bibles for $50. The gospel is for sale. Everything's for sale when it comes to you all's president, those of you who feel that the election was stolen from him. I don't want to be like water and spread all over the surface, but it's difficult for me to focus on one thing when there are so many things going on in the world, in this country, which merit discussion. But I'm going to try to put skid chains on my tongue, corral my unruly spirit, and focus on what I came here to talk about today. What must be kept in mind is that the Jews who are condemned must be the Jews who are doing that for which condemnation is given. We as black people, better probably than any other group, understand, but sometimes it's difficult to act on that when we watch what others are doing, that if Mr. A did something, don't mistreat Ms. B because she's near at hand. The Jews that I blame are the ones who are doing these things or facilitating these things that are being done that I will talk about. You could never get me to say, I hate every Jew. I hate every Italian. I hate every one of any group. Every person is responsible for his or her conduct. The degree of culpability is based on how deeply involved the person we're looking at is. Now, there can be fellow travelers, that's what they call people who are not out-and-out communists, but who had leanings in that direction, and all of them were hated. Suspicion was enough. Keep in mind that not every Jew, and I use that term to embrace all those everywhere in the world who call themselves Jews, even if it's only because they embrace the religion. Not every Israeli is involved in what is being done to the point where personal responsibility should rest on them. But Netanyahu is the one who is the evil person, and he indeed is evil. He is directing his people who carry guns. Remember this, by the way, a digression. Who has the tanks? The Israelis. Who has the armored vehicles? The Israelis. Who have the bombs? The Israelis. Who have the missiles? The Israelis. Who have the airplanes? The Israelis. Who are killing men, women, and babies? Israelis. The ones who do it and those who facilitate their doing it are the ones who bear the responsibility. But when there is a lot of anger, a lot of hostility, people don't make distinctions. Black people and the way we behaved during those terrible decades when we could be lynched on whim, when little black girls in a church on a Sunday morning being taught about a white Jesus could be blown into eternity, when black girls seeking a decent education walked down the hallways of these formerly segregated schools, they were spat upon. They would have stuff poured on them in the lunchroom by white people who were supposed to be the master race. And there were white adults who not only knew this, but joined in it. One of the most telling photographs is of this young black girl. She's clutching her books, and these ugly white people, faces contorted by hatred, screaming at her, the master race. One young black girl and this massive mob of screaming white people. You know the John Waynes, the heroes in mobs, they're unbeatable, one-on-one, and they are mice. We must have been portrayed and considered Superman, because to get one black man, they would always take a mob, always. And that mobbing spirit and instinct governs, by and large, the way black people are treated to this day. If you stay in your place, you're all right. But let me get to what I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to do some reading, and that will help control and corral my unruly spirit. These items that I'm reading from are from years and years ago, but they could be considered out of today's newspaper. This is the most recent one, and it's from July of 2020, 4 years roughly ago, in the World Herald. Israel must end its abusive policies and agree to justice for Palestinians. This essay by Douglas Patterson was signed by Patterson and the 16 other members of the Nebraskans for Peace Palestinian Rights Task Force, including leaders from local, academic, and faith communities. Israel's, quote, annexation of more Palestinian land is a crime, but it is in fact a continuation of Israel's crimes colonizing and terrorizing virtually all of Palestine since 1948, when the Jews influxed from Europe and took over. Excuse me. Moreover, it is a continuation of the vast European settler colonialism crimes that started in 1492 with Columbus and continued with Spanish, French, and English invasions of what conquerors would call the Americas. The United States' claim of, quote, manifest destiny, unquote, in 1845 over all indigenous land is an odd parallel with the Zionist claims to Palestine a mere 50 years later. Begun at that time by Jewish Zionists in several European countries, the colonization of Christian/Muslim Palestine in 1948 lingers like the last European settler colonial project, genocidal, ethnic cleansing, daily oppression, terrorism, a disaster like all the rest. An entire people has been dispossessed of their land. Debate continues as to whether the very establishment of Israel was itself a crime. Its 20th and 21st century apartheid policies sustain that debate. However, with the proposed, quote, annexation, unquote, of a large portion of Palestine into Israel, we see yet another shockingly aggressive land grab by indicted criminal Israel Prime Minister Netanyahu and Imperial Israel. Excuse me. Indeed, the proposed seizure is state terrorism and reinforces the role of Israel as the region's leading terrorist state and serial violator of international law. Over 1,000 lawmakers from 25 European countries have warned Israel that, quote, acquisition of territory by force has no place in 2020 and must have commensurate consequences, unquote. But those consequences have not been forthcoming, and that's thanks to the United States, which is indeed a racist country, founded on racism, nurtured on racism, imbued with racism, racism taken in by babies with their mother's milk. Going back, continuing. Reliable support from U.S. administrations over the years make us all responsible for this immoral Zionist settler apartheid project. See July 5th World Herald article on anti-apartheid activist Benjamin Pogrund. But Donald Trump's approval is the only approval Israel cares about. Given the tens of billions of dollars Israel and its massive military have received from the U.S. over 70 years, fiscal 2019, they got $3.8 billion or $10.4 million per day. Israel has become a virtual 51st U.S. state, whether voters wanted it or not. I'm going to skip some of this. Thus the need for the nod for annexation from D.C. Regardless, the imminent annexation raises many issues of conquest, not the least of which is the status and rights of tens of thousands of Palestinians in the seized land. The action is so ham-handed and hurried that a human catastrophe ever sought by Israel is possible. We members of Nebraskans for Peace Palestinian Rights Task Force urge all U.S. citizens to contact their representatives and raise your voice and try to get them to do the right thing. What I'm going to do is read from some items that I wrote over 20 years ago. This one in 2002. They appeared in Omaha Star. Nazi Israel, Palestinian Holocaust. Keep in mind as I read this, 20 years ago I wrote it. Anger, rage, fury, seething Palestinian anger combusts into flaming rage which settles into a cold, determined fury that will be satisfied by nothing less than bringing to Israelis what they have wreaked upon the Palestinians. Hear ye, all who hate President Yasser Arafat and the Palestinians and believe Israel can do no wrong should jump off the train right here. Those who forge ahead will find much they agree with, but are afraid to say or even think. My suggestion, around midnight, take a flashlight or candle to the attic, basement, or into a closet, shut the door, and read this column, then deny having seen it if anyone asks you. Quote, water can't quench the fire of love, unquote, and Israeli artillery, warplanes, tanks, bombs, and rockets cannot extinguish the soul-deep dedication that inspires young Palestinians to become human bombs, self-detonated in the midst of the enemy, slaughtering Palestinian civilians by the hundreds, as in the refugee camp of Jenin, destroying homes, schools, hospitals, water, and power lines, only deepens the fury, intensifies the dedication, fans hatred, and multiplies the number of lethal enemies of all things Israeli. The real axis of evil is America, Britain, and Israel. I say it again. The real axis of evil, that was a George Bush statement, talking about others, is America, Britain, and Israel. The question is, how long is the world prepared to continue tolerating the existence of the world destabilizing state of Israel, which was created and can only be maintained by American and British kill power and perpetual Israeli sponsored chaos in the Middle East? A decade from now, Israel may be no more. Obviously, that didn't occur. Palestinian demands are uncomplicated and eminently reasonable. The end of Israeli occupation/oppression and creation of an independent Palestinian state with freedom and security. Israeli goals are straightforward and eminently evil: to exterminate the Palestinian people and to draw America and Britain into an all-out war against Middle Eastern nations designated by Israel as its enemies. Brothers and sisters, what the Israelis are perpetrating against the Palestinians plunges the mind into turmoil as turbulent thoughts tumble against and clash violently with one another. They are troubling, mixed thoughts that mess with the mind. Some careen and dart like swallows. Others drift slowly and ominously like sinister vultures riding the upper currents of the air, surveying the earth far below. Still others are marked by the majestic soaring of the evil and the purposeful swoop of the falcon. How to write this column? There's so much I want to say, goes the song, but the right words won't come my way. Clearly, the Middle East presents a violence-rich situation, drenched and dripping with violence, fomented primarily by Israeli militarism and oppression. Can a reasonable person separate innocent individual Israelis from the collective Israeli occupier/oppressor who behaves toward the Palestinian people like a butcher dismembering the carcass of a slaughtered lamb? The part that always is sane and rational easily performs the trick, but is a different story for that part lurking in the deeper, shadowed caverns near the bottom of human nature, that sinister part that crouches warily in a darkened corner, teeth bared and muscles bunched, poised to spring. Keeping this beast in check, for it cannot be tamed, is a stern challenge. The V word. Racist America, and Nazi Israel have so much in common. During the civil rights struggle in the USA, the word violence was not used to describe racist depredations against black people, whether they involved blowing up little black girls in church on a bright Sunday morning or lynching black men in the dead of a warm southern night. Instead, the V word was reserved for black victims of racist violence who merely demonstrated peaceably against the violence and spoke of the right of self-defense. In Palestine, the unjustified Israel taking of a Palestinian life is not an act of murder. When an innocent Palestinian is killed, it is not a death. Murder of Palestinians is not violence. Stop, children. What's that sound? The eerie sound is the echo of Nazi Germany, and that fearsome apparition is the looming, restless spirit of Adolf Hitler, whose destructive policies came to nothing in his own hands, but are coming to bountiful fruition through the Israelis as they undertake the systematic destruction of the Palestinian people, a wicked, genocidal policy dubbed the final solution when pursued by Hitler and his henchmen against the Jews. I'd rather talk than just read, but I stray and wander too much. Animals of the same species fight over territory in order to have sufficient means to meet their survival needs. Remember, animals of the same species fight only when it's necessary for their survival. Is it possible that Hitler feared/hated Jews so intensely, almost maniacally, because he perhaps saw something that others had missed? Did he think he discerned in Jews the same malignant spirit that drove him to belief that a German God had created superior Aryans and inferior Jews? And is that perverse notion asserting itself in the bloody spectacle of Israeli Jews attempting to isolate and exterminate the inferior Palestinians under the delusion that Jehovah chose them, gave them Palestine, and declared that they should annihilate the Palestinians? Will the Israelis duplicate Hitler's failed madness? In view of having coined the mantra Jews did, never again, after suffering through a Holocaust at the hands of the Nazis, it is remarkable and unsettling that Jews do it again to the Palestinians. The Israeli military is a combination of the Nazi Gestapo, Geheim Staatspolice, or the secret police known as stormtroopers, and the militarized Waffen-SS, whose Death Heads units operated the concentration camps. Like the Nazi Israelis, both organizations, the SS and the Gestapo, were known and noted for terror tactics and extreme brutality, in the same way that Heinrich Himmler modeled his SS upon the Jesuit tenets of discipline and blind obedience. Jesuits are known as the soldiers of the Pope. Creighton is the Jesuit university. That's where I survived for 4 years and got a history degree and gave the Jesuits fits. But anyway, let me continue. Himmler modeled his SS upon the Jesuit tenets of discipline and blind obedience. The Israeli military is modeled after Nazi paradigms. In the refugee camp of Jenin, which has become a Nazi-Israeli death camp, the Israeli SS is slaughtering, mutilating, and incinerating scores of Palestinian civilians. How many of you all remember or even knew about this refugee camp where the Nazi Israelis were slaughtering Palestinians? They stop ambulances doctors, aid workers. Isn't that what these Jews are doing now? Right now, as I'm speaking to you. Rescuers with the International Red Cross and the Red Crescent have been fired on and some killed by the Israeli SS. In the past 15 days, as of April 13th that year, when this column was written, there have been 112 attacks upon ambulances and rescue workers who have been forced to watch helplessly as Palestinians bleed to death because the Israeli SS prevent them from rendering aid. Apache helicopters provided by the USA have launched attacks on the refugee camp, killing untold numbers of civilians, including pregnant women and children. Mangled and dismembered bodies are scattered about and piling up, creating horrendous health hazards in addition to agony and grief. If you watch the news, you see how the Israelis raided Gaza, which was Palestinian land, and drove them farther and farther south. More and more people, over 1 million, are in a relatively small area called Rafah. And that's where Benjamin Netanyahu said he's going to launch a ground attack. Against whom? Who's there? Civilians, men, women, and babies. These Jews, God's chosen people, supposedly, the ones who want sympathy because of what they claim happened to them at the hands of the Nazis, and they're doing to Palestinians worse things than the Nazis did to them. And this country is backing it up. Biden, chicken liver that he is afraid to do anything. But finally, America did not block a vote by the UN Security Council unanimously calling for a ceasefire by Israel. But Netanyahu said that doesn't mean anything to him. And he'll give Biden the back of the hand. But without American support, money, weaponry, Israel couldn't exist. And we as black people have to watch this and relive through what's happening to the Palestinians, what happened to our forefathers, foremothers, men, women, children. And the crowning humiliation is to be stripped naked and made to be in public that way. And that's what the Jews are doing. They are doing things that Nazis didn't do to them. People need to have painted with broad strokes what is happening to the Palestinians in 2024, right under everybody's nose. And Americans sit back and watch. The exterminators shall pay. Remember, I wrote this 22 years ago. While carrying out the systematic slaughter of hundreds of Palestinians, the bulldozing of entire towns and villages, and the barring of assistance to the injured and dying. How about when the Palestinians are trying to get this food that's being dropped? And the Israelis attack them, saying that Hamas has people among them trying to get this. What does a Hamas member look like? Does it look like somebody whose body is in the shape of an H for Hamas? Do they wear uniforms? Do they wear badges? All Israel has to do is say Hamas. They went into the only operational hospital, the largest one, and arrested 800 people. 800 people in the hospital, and said they were members of Hamas. And Americans swallow it because they want to believe that Israel has a just cause for behaving in such an inhumane manner. But keep this in mind even as I talk. The Israelis who are responsible for this are the ones who are doing it. If you have or had a Jewish friend, why should that friendship be broken because of what somebody else has done? Unless that person does it or shows an affinity for it. That person was your friend yesterday. That person should be your friend today. Should synagogues be attacked? One of these days, if I remember, maybe I read it already. There was an attack on a synagogue in Lincoln, and I stood on the floor and talked about the difference between attacking a building and attacking people. But when it's a building that symbolizes what people are, even though it's half destroyed, mortar can be repaired or replaced, window glass can be replaced. But when you attack something that is very dear to people, you are then attacking the human spirit, which cannot be so easily healed and replaced. And then I talked about racism, discrimination, and how wrong those things are. And when this synagogue was attacked, it was more than just brick and mortar and glass. And a column was written about the fact that I had talked about racism and so forth many times in the legislature, but this time it was different. Knots of senators who were talking all became silent. They all looked at Senator Chambers, and nobody uttered a word or made a sound. He had often spoken of discrimination, racial hatred, and so forth, but this time it was different. Now, if I hated all Jews, why should not I have exulted when a symbol of what means something to the Jews was attacked in this fashion? I can distinguish between a perpetrator and somebody who happens to look like the perpetrator but didn't do the perpetration. Make a distinction. We who are calling for justice must ourselves be just, and it's extremely difficult. When I was in that legislature, I saw every day how cruel, how selfish white people could be by the bills they would pass that would, as I say, support Daddy Warbucks and hurt little orphan Annie. So I had to try to stand between them and little orphan Annie and draw a line and say, this far shall you come, but no farther. And I did it for 46 years. And I have the documentation to prove it. We don't overcome the hatred by returning hatred for hatred. We can repel that hateful person, but it should be directed at that one who is doing it and the ones who support, but not others who happen to bear the same last name, the same general appearance, or whatever you call a racial characteristic. And it's difficult to be 1 out of 49, trying to tell the master race, so-called, how the master race should behave and comport itself. That my constituency consisted of the 3 L's, the least, the last, and the lost. Naturally, little children. Continuing. While carrying out the systematic slaughter of hundreds of Palestinians, the bulldozing of entire towns and villages, the barring of assistance to the injured and dying, the Israelis scream bloody murder when a few Israelis pay the supreme price. Ultimately, the oppressive Jews will pay as they always have throughout history. Every puppy has its day, as the Nazis learned when the time came for them to pay. History is inexorable, and cannot be escaped. A new generation of embittered Palestinians is being raised up and cultivated by hatred of the Israeli butchers and nurtured on the determination to utterly destroy the state of Israel, root and branch, for its murderous oppression and to smite Israelis hip and thigh. So when these racists in America say that there are people who want to destroy the state of Israel and think it shouldn't exist, they have reason. How many of you all condemn people who wanted to destroy the Nazi regime and the Nazis with it? But the Palestinians, who had people come into their land, take it, brutalize, literally murder them, their women and their children. Why should they want those murderers to have what would be called a state? They could not feel safe until root and branch of that thing no longer exist. You understand it when it's on your front porch. But when you look across the street and see it on your neighbor's porch, you say he or she must have done something or it wouldn't happen. But then when it comes to your porch, you dial 911 and want somebody to be there instantaneously. Continuing. When the day of reckoning comes, Israelis will ask brainlessly, as did the Americans after September 11th, why do they hate us? Before the current Israeli military onslaught, more than 1,600 Palestinians had been slain, providing more than 1,600 reasons why Israel is hated. Jenin was a refugee camp where the people in that camp were slaughtered. They were not an army. They were not uprising. They couldn't, because they were restricted to this area and confined, and it was described as a refugee camp. Having attempted to execute the Nazi scheme of reducing Palestinians to subhuman status, Untermenschen, as the Nazis labeled Jews, Israelis would do well to recall that the mighty Nazis in the end saw their 1,000-year Reich reduced to rubble and their leaders dancing with nimble feet up on the air at the end of the hangman's hideous rope. Suicide bombers. Do you recall the American suicide bombers who on September, and not that they were Americans, but it happened in America, who on September 11th crashed Flight 93 in Pennsylvania, because that plane was going to, maybe they were headed for the Pentagon or somewhere, but some passengers took it over and crashed it anyway. Do you recall the American suicide bombers who on September 11th crashed Flight 93 in Pennsylvania and by so doing took upon themselves the right to snuff out the lives of dozens of innocent passengers? Weren't they lionized as heroes because they committed suicide and killed other innocent people for a greater good? Israel perpetrated the current carnage in Palestine by unleashing horrendous kill power against civilians, but the tactic has not worked. The Palestinian spirit is not crushed. Israel has baited, provoked, and murdered, then expects Palestinians not to respond to the provocation. Predictably, Israeli provocations have spawned countermeasures, exemplifying the principle that every action produces an opposite and equal reaction. The Israeli invader/occupier is like a criminal who breaks into a Palestinian home, puts a gun to the Palestinian's head, and insists that the Palestinian has no right to order the criminal to leave or to try to expel him. Moreover, Palestinians are put in the position of the black man in the grim joke, who is buried up to his neck in sand by a racist mob, who then released an enraged pit bull on him. The only thing sticking up is his head. When the black man swiveled his head and managed to elude the lunging animal and fasten his teeth on its throat, the mob began beating the man about the head with clubs, screaming, "Turn the dog loose and fight fair." In other words, let the dog chew you up. Ariel Sharon's miscalculation. Prime Minister Ariel Sharon is a Zionist who cleaves to the notion that Israelis have a Jehovah-given right to slaughter Palestinians and steal their land, while Palestinians have a corresponding obligation to go along with the program and docilely allow themselves to be slaughtered without fighting back, as most Jews did during the Holocaust. So Sharon, the butcher of Israel, blusters and brags. This is why I hate to read. Brags to Israelis from his safe hideout, like Bush on and after September 11th, quote, "I will protect you from the Palestinians," unquote. "Oh, really?" respond the Palestinians, accepting the challenge. "We will reach out and touch you in the heart of your stronghold, Jerusalem." Boom. Palestinians deliver. Sharon cannot. Sharon's unremitting violence and provocations are deemed okay. Palestinian response is not. That is known as the double standard. I'm going to read some more of this as time goes on, but it's difficult for me to take the whole time reading it, and maybe nobody wants to hear it. But there are things that all of us hear that we don't want to, even when they might be for our own good. Somebody could tell me I've got cancer and this and that has to be done about it. My plugging up my ears is not going to change anything. I need to listen, find out what can be done to rectify the situation, and cooperate. That's what an intelligent person will do. And if self-preservation is the first rule of nature, then to preserve self, it's best to listen to those who have the knowledge and the wherewithal to help with that preservation. There's a limit to what one person can do, but even that one person, and that could be you, has no knowledge in advance what that limit is. People find out that in certain circumstances, they, without even thinking consciously in the sense of logically reasoning and saying, I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I get to 6, they do what needs to be done, and there is a beneficial result. People have to learn how to be human. The definition that some people give of human is rational animal. To be rational means to be able to think, able to reason, able to make moral judgments, able to determine what personal responsibility and obligation are, and then be able to act in accord with what we know to be the right thing. Time and tide, as they say, wait for no man. My time is running out for this presentation. Some will be glad. Others have tuned out a long time ago. But what others do is not what determines what I do. That one that I always speak of, who's deep down inside of me, dictates what it is I'm going to do in disregard for and of whatever anybody else may say or do. And with that, I'm out of here.
You've been watching The Ernie Chambers Show. If you'd like to leave suggestions, email us at ewcfacts@gmail.com. That's ewcfacts@gmail.com. This is an EWC Communications production.